Marcus Thorne was 39 years old, a licensed electrician with a steady income of $61,000 a year, and he was standing in the cold Cleveland rain, locked out of his own life. The rain wasn't a downpour, just a miserable, persistent drizzle that seemed to seep through the collar of his $70 Carhartt jacket and trace a cold path down his spine. It was 7:03 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. The air smelled of wet asphalt and decaying leaves. He stood on the freshly poured concrete walkway, a walkway he himself had framed and poured over 3 long weekends. He looked at the front door of the Glenville duplex, a door he had bought for $450 from a salvage yard, stripped, sanded, and painted a deep, welcoming blue. His key, the familiar brass key that had been in his pocket for months, slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. It met a hard, unyielding stop. It was a new lock. A $250 Schlage digital keypad lock, the kind he had just installed a month ago. He had been so proud of it. He lifted a hand, his knuckles stiff from the cold, and entered his personal 6-digit code. The keypad, usually responsive and bright, blinked red twice and emitted a flat, negative buzz. Access denied. He tried again, thinking maybe his fingers were too cold, too wet. He carefully, deliberately pressed each number, 628194. His birthday, red blink, negative buzz, a knot of pure dread, cold and heavy as a lead weight formed in his gut. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a message. This duplex wasn't just a house. It was his heart and soul rendered in drywall, copper wire, and 2x4s. It was a 2-year project, a dilapidated structure, on a forgotten street that he was breathing life back into, almost single-handedly. It was a $94,000 loan from the Cleveland Municipal Employees Credit Union, a debt tethered directly to his name and his future. It was supposed to be the foundation for his life with his wife, Tasha. He looked up at the second-floor window, the one that should have been their bedroom. A light was on, a warm, yellow light that made the place look like a home. For a terrifying second, he thought maybe there was a burglar. But then a shadow moved across the curtain. The silhouette was unmistakable, crowned with the familiar, elegant coif. It wasn't Tasha. It was her mother, Brenda. As he watched, frozen on the sidewalk, he heard the distinct, metallic thunk of a deadbolt being thrown from the inside. Not the electronic lock, but the old-fashioned manual one at the bottom. A deliberate, final sound. An exclamation point on a sentence he was only just beginning to read. He was a man who understood systems. He understood circuits, load calculations, and the logical flow of power. And in that moment, a new and terrible circuit diagram bloomed in his mind. The components were his wife, his mother-in-law, and the dream he had poured his life into. The switch had just been thrown, and he was on the outside, the circuit broken, the power flowing somewhere he could no longer access. The devastation was not loud or explosive. It was a quiet, crushing certainty that settled over him, as damp and chilling as the Cleveland rain itself. The whole thing had started with a dream that smelled like sawdust and potential. 2 years earlier, Marcus had found the duplex in Glenville. It was a wreck, boarded up and sagging. But the bones were good. It was listed for a mere $35,000, a price that reflected the sheer amount of work it needed. He saw past the peeling paint and broken windows. He saw a home and an investment. "Look, Tasha," he'd said, his voice full of an excitement she didn't seem to share. They were standing in the dusty, cobweb-filled living room. "We live in the downstairs unit, 3 bedrooms. We rent out the 2-bedroom unit upstairs. The rent could cover most of the mortgage. We'd be building equity, real wealth." Tasha, a stunning black woman whose beauty was always polished and precise, wrinkled her nose. She was wearing a pair of white jeans that probably cost more than the room's new flooring would. "It smells, Marcus. And look at this place. It's a teardown." "It's not a teardown, it's a foundation," he insisted, his own deep brown skin glowing with a thin sheen of sweat and enthusiasm. "I can do most of the work myself. The electrical is a gut job, but that's my trade. I can handle the plumbing, the drywall. We just need to contract out the roof." The vision was so clear in his mind. He saw himself, his hands creating a safe, modern, comfortable home. He saw a future where they weren't just paying rent to someone else, but were landlords, owners, masters of their own small patch of the world. He secured the $94,000 renovation and purchase loan himself. His credit was solid, built on years of paying every bill on time, of living within the means of his $61,000 salary. Tasha's name wasn't on the loan. Her credit was a mess of high-interest retail cards and a defaulted student loan from a community college course she never finished. It was a practical decision, one she'd readily agreed to. "You handle the money stuff, baby," she'd said with a wave of her hand, as if dismissing a servant. "I'm the creative director." His life became a cycle of 8 hours on a commercial job site, followed by another 8 hours at the duplex. His 2012 Toyota Camry, with 187,000 miles on it, was perpetually coated in a layer of drywall dust. His evenings were filled with the methodical work he loved. He spent $1,200 on spools of 12-gauge and 14-gauge Romex wire, carefully running new circuits through the skeleton of the house. Each of the 80 new outlets he installed was a small victory, a testament to his precision. He chose high-quality GFCI outlets for the kitchen and baths, each one costing $18, a small price for safety. He installed a brand-new 200-amp electrical panel, a $450 metal box that was the heart of the entire system, a heart he was personally transplanting. Tasha's role as creative director mostly involved sending him links to eye-wateringly expensive fixtures. "Can we get this chandelier for the dining room?" she'd text him, with a link to a $4,000 crystal monstrosity. "It would be so glamorous." "Let's get the walls built first, honey," he would reply gently. "Let's focus on the bones." "Bones are boring," she'd pout. "No one sees the wires, Marcus. They see the finishes." He tried to explain that the wires were the most important part, the unseen nervous system that made everything else possible. She would just sigh, her disinterest a palpable thing. The contrast between them was stark. He wore $40 work pants and $120 Red Wing boots, tools of his trade. She wore $2,400 Burberry dresses to brunch with her friends from the marketing firm where she worked as a receptionist. He tracked every dollar spent on lumber and pipe fittings. She saw her $800 Amex bill for a single dinner as a networking expense. One Saturday, he was on his back under the kitchen sink, wrestling with a P-trap, when Tasha's mother, Brenda, paid one of her inspections. Brenda lived in a sprawling 6-bedroom colonial in Shaker Heights, a $600,000 monument to her late husband's success as a corporate lawyer. She glided through the construction zone of the duplex like a queen visiting a peasant's hovel, her $900 Stuart Weitzman boots somehow avoiding the worst of the debris. She surveyed the half-finished kitchen, her lips pursed in a look of profound disappointment. Marcus's tools were laid out neatly on a piece of cardboard, a $25 basin wrench, a $15 tube of plumber's putty, a roll of Teflon tape. "It's all very industrious, Marcus," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. She ran a manicured finger over a stack of drywall sheets. "Are you quite sure you know what you're doing? This is a lot to take on for one person. It seems more like a hobby than a professional job." "I'm a licensed electrician, Brenda," Marcus said, his voice muffled from under the sink. "And I've done plenty of residential work. I know what I'm doing." "Of course, dear," she said, patting Tasha's arm. "But there's a difference between a tradesman and an architect, isn't there? My Tasha is used to a certain level of quality." Tasha, instead of defending him, just gave a weak, apologetic smile. "Mom, he's trying." Trying. The word landed like a small, sharp stone in Marcus's chest. He wasn't trying. He was succeeding. He was building their home with his own two hands, his own knowledge, his own money. But in their eyes, he was just a man playing with tools, a laborer whose efforts were cute, but ultimately not up to their imagined standard. He had no idea then that they weren't just judging his work, they were judging his worth, and they had already found him wanting. The cruelty wasn't a sudden storm, it was a rising tide, a series of small, cutting remarks and dismissive gestures that slowly eroded the ground beneath his feet. The more progress he made on the duplex, the more their condescension seemed to grow, as if his competence was an affront to them. One of the worst moments came the day he installed the smart home system. It was his pride and joy, a state-of-the-art Leviton panel that cost him $1,800, not including his own labor, which would have billed out at over $3,000. It integrated the lights, the thermostat, the door locks, and the security cameras into one seamless app. He spent a full weekend meticulously programming it, creating custom scenes and user profiles. "Check this out," he said to Tasha, his face lit with the glow of his phone. He tapped a button labeled Movie Night. Instantly, the recessed living room lights, a $600 investment, dimmed to 30%, and the under-cabinet lights in the kitchen switched off. "See? All from your phone." For a moment, she was genuinely impressed. "Wow, that's actually cool." He created a user profile for her, Tasha Bear, with full administrative rights. He made himself the master admin. He even made a guest profile for Brenda, though he limited its permissions. "Just in case she ever needs to let a contractor in," he explained. That evening, they ate pizza off a cardboard box sitting on two paint buckets in the middle of the living room. The air smelled of primer and joint compound. For a brief hour, it felt like they were a team again, partners in a grand adventure. Sunlight streamed through the new, energy-efficient windows he'd helped install, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He thought, this is it. This is what building a life feels like. He had no idea what was coming. A few weeks later, Tasha announced she wanted to host a pre-housewarming party. "Just a few of my girlfriends from work," she said. "A little champagne, some hors d'oeuvres, to show off the progress." Marcus looked around the downstairs unit. The floors were still bare subfloor. The walls were primed but not painted. And his tools were everywhere. "Tasha, it's not ready. It's a construction site." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "We can just hide your tools in a corner. I want to show my friends what we're doing. They all think we're crazy for buying in Glenville." "Then let's wait until it's finished, until it's something to be proud of," he argued. Her face hardened. "I'm not having your dusty work friends over, Marcus. I mean my friends. They drive BMWs and live in the suburbs. They're used to nice things. I don't want them seeing all this mess." The implication was clear. His work, his process, was the mess. He and his world were something to be hidden. Brenda, of course, fanned the flames. During their next phone call, which Tasha put on speaker, her mother's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Tasha has an image to maintain, Marcus. Her friends are influential. This little project of yours is a charming story, but the reality is a bit grim, isn't it? You can't expect her to entertain in a place that looks like a Home Depot exploded." "It's a work in progress," Marcus said, his jaw tight. "Well, progress a little faster then," Brenda snapped. "Or maybe you should have just hired a real general contractor instead of trying to do it all yourself. It would have been done by now." The financial strain began to show not in the construction budget, which Marcus managed with meticulous care, but in Tasha's personal spending. He was putting every spare dollar into the house, packing his own lunch, forgoing new clothes, wearing his $89 Timex watch with a cracked face. Meanwhile, Tasha's spending escalated. One evening, he opened a credit card statement addressed to her. He didn't mean to pry, but the bright red past due stamp caught his eye. He saw a charge for $1,200 at a high-end restaurant in Crocker Park, another for $850 at Saks Fifth Avenue, and a weekend trip to a spa that cost $1,500. The total balance was over $10,000, and she had only made the minimum payment. He approached her cautiously that night. "Tasha, we need to talk about this," he said, holding the statement. "The mortgage payments on the duplex have started. That's $780 a month, on top of all the material costs. We need to be a team on this." She snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes flashing with anger. "Are you going through my mail now? This is my business, Marcus." "It's our business when we have a $94,000 loan to pay off," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm working 16-hour days to build this future for us, and you're—" "I'm what?" she challenged. "Living my life?" "I have to look the part for my job, Marcus. It's called networking. It's an investment in my career. You wouldn't understand. You're happy to be covered in dirt all day." The phone rang. It was Brenda. Tasha answered, putting her on speaker deliberately. A power move. "Hi, Mom. Marcus is giving me a lecture about money." Brenda didn't miss a beat. "Oh, is he? Let me tell you something, Marcus. A man provides. That is his function. If you cannot provide for the lifestyle my daughter is accustomed to, then perhaps you overestimated your own abilities when you married her. Don't punish her for your own financial limitations." The cruelty of it, so casual and absolute, sucked the air from his lungs. He looked at Tasha, expecting, or at least hoping for, a flicker of defense for her husband. He saw nothing. She just stood there, holding the phone, a silent co-signer on her mother's brutal assessment. He was not a partner, he was a function, a utility, and he was failing to perform. The final, unforgivable betrayal came a week before the lockout. He discovered Brenda had persuaded Tasha to see a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, something far more insidious. A real estate lawyer. He found the consultation bill for $500 tucked into Tasha's purse while looking for car keys. The lawyer's name was Stephen Finch, a name he recognized from a billboard advertising aggressive property litigation. He didn't confront her. A cold, terrifying premonition kept him silent. He started making quiet preparations. He went online to the county recorder's office and paid $15 to get digital copies of the deed and the mortgage agreement. He downloaded his bank statements showing the automatic withdrawals for the loan payments. He took screenshots of the Smart Panel's master registration confirmation, which was tied to his email and his name. He gathered the original electrical and plumbing permits, all bearing his signature and license number. He was compiling evidence, though he didn't know exactly what for. He just felt a deep, instinctual need to protect the work of his hands. He was an electrician. He knew that before you can fix a problem, you have to understand the circuit. He was beginning to understand this one all too well. They didn't see the duplex as their home. They saw it as his asset, and they were planning to disconnect him from it. The rain continued its relentless patter on the hood of his jacket. As he stood on the sidewalk, the red blink of the keypad lock burned into his memory. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over Tasha's contact photo. He could call, scream, demand answers. But what would that accomplish? He'd be met with a lie or a dial tone. The time for emotional reaction was over. His mind, trained to think in logical sequences, was already shifting into diagnostic mode. He took a deep, steadying breath and opened the Leviton Smart Home app. His training as an electrician wasn't just about bending conduit and pulling wire. It was about understanding complex systems, about troubleshooting from a distance. The app was his remote diagnostic tool. He first tried a system-level command, one he had programmed himself, Master Lockdown, which should have secured all entry points. The app spun for a moment before a red banner appeared at the top. Authentication failed. Your user permissions have changed. His heart, which had been a heavy knot, now felt like it was plummeting through his stomach. He navigated to the user management screen. It was a list of everyone with access to the house. Or it was supposed to be. He scanned the list. Tasha Bear was there. Brenda Guest was there. But his own profile, the one named Marcus Master Admin, was gone. Not disabled, not demoted. It had been completely deleted. In its place was a new profile he had never seen before, Queen Bee. And next to it, the damning label, Master Administrator, Brenda. She hadn't just used Tasha's phone to do this. She had created her own master profile and erased him. They hadn't just locked him out for the night. They had performed a digital coup, seizing control of the very nervous system he had so painstakingly built. He felt a wave of nausea. All those hours, all that meticulous work, all that pride, usurped with a few taps on a screen. He stared at the screen, the rain dripping from his hair onto the glass. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. The cruelty was one thing, the cold, calculated strategy was another. They had waited until he was at work, then systematically dismantled his access, his authority, his very presence in the digital architecture of the home. And then, as if to twist the knife, his phone chimed with a notification from the app itself. He looked down. The message had been generated at exactly 7:14 p.m., just minutes before he had arrived. It was a system log update. It read, "All user access codes have been successfully updated by Master Administrator Queen Bee. System synchronized." That was it. The final irrefutable piece of data. They hadn't just deleted his profile. They had changed all the numerical codes, rendering his knowledge useless. They had locked the door and then burned the map. The feeling that washed over him wasn't hot rage. It was an ice-cold, terrifying clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a fight that could be resolved with an apology. This was a hostile takeover. This was war. And they had just fired the first decisive shot. He didn't try the door again. He didn't shout. He didn't call. He simply turned around and walked back to his dusty Toyota Camry. He got in, the driver's seat sighing under his weight, and sat for a long moment, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers counting out the seconds. He looked at the house, his house, now occupied by hostile forces. The warm light in the window no longer looked welcoming. It looked like a trophy they had stolen from him. He was a methodical man. He knew that when a circuit is compromised, you don't just flip the breaker back on. You isolate the fault. You trace the lines. You understand the point of failure before you even think about restoring power. His life was now a compromised circuit, and he would be methodical. He would be patient. He would trace every line. He started the car, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble. He pulled away from the curb, his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the duplex shrink until it was just another dark shape on a rain-slicked Cleveland street. He was now a man without a home, but he was not a man without a plan. Marcus drove for 20 minutes, his mind a silent, churning engine of logic and hurt. He passed familiar streets, restaurants he and Tasha had been to, parks where they had walked. Each one was a small, painful memory he boxed up and set aside. Emotion was a liability now. he needed to operate with the cold precision of a surgeon. He bypassed the apartments of his friends, the homes of his family. He couldn't face the questions, the pity. He needed isolation to think. He ended up on a bleak stretch of highway on the west side, pulling into the parking lot of the Crestwood Inn, a 2-story motel with a flickering neon sign that promised color TV and free ice. The room cost $58 a night, payable in cash. It smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The bedspread was a thin, scratchy polyester blend in a nauseating shade of orange. It was perfect. It was an emotional void, a place with no history and no expectations. He sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, his work boots leaving damp prints on the threadbare carpet. He took out his phone, not to make a call, but to begin his documentation. He took a screenshot of the smart home app's user screen, showing Queen Bee as the administrator. He took a screenshot of the notification from 7:14 p.m. He saved them to a new password-protected folder on his cloud drive. He named the folder Glenville Evidence. He slept for 3 hours, a restless, dreamless sleep, and woke up at 4:30 a.m. The first step was to establish their narrative. He had to play the part they had cast for him, the confused, wronged husband. He needed to hear their lies, to get them on record, even if that record was only his own memory. At 8:15 a.m., a respectable time, he called Tasha. He let the phone ring 4 times before she picked up. Her hello was guarded, wary. He pitched his voice to sound worried, not angry. "Hey, babe. Something's wrong with the locks at the house. My key isn't working, and my code got rejected." He delivered the lines perfectly, like an actor in a play. There was a long pause on the other end. He could hear the faint, muffled sound of Brenda whispering instructions to her daughter. The performance was being co-directed. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus," Tasha finally said. Her voice was thin and unnatural, the voice of someone reading a bad script. "What do you mean you don't know?" he pressed, allowing a note of frustration to enter his tone. "I'm locked out, Tasha. I can't get into our house. Did you change the code?" Another pause. More whispering. He could almost picture them, huddled together in the kitchen he had built, plotting their next line. "There's nothing for you here anymore, Marcus," Tasha said, her voice suddenly colder, firmer. She was parroting her mother now. "My mother and I are staying here. We need some space. We'll be in touch about your things." Click. She hung up. Marcus stared at the phone. It was exactly as he had expected, and yet the cold finality of it still landed like a punch. Your things. Not our things. They had already divided the property in their minds. He saved the call record, noting the time and duration. The first lie was officially on the books. He was not just locked out, he was being erased. He spent the rest of that day methodically gathering his power. He didn't go to work. He called his foreman, told him he had a family emergency, and that he'd be out for a day or two. Then he drove to the Cuyahoga County Records office downtown. He stood in line, paid a $45 fee, and walked out with certified paper copies of every document related to the duplex, the deed showing him as the sole purchaser, the mortgage agreement for the $94,000 loan, showing him as the sole debtor, and the crown jewels, the complete file of permits for the renovation. The electrical permit was a thick stack of paper detailing every circuit, every outlet, every switch, and on the front page, in a box marked Responsible Licensed Professional, was his name, Marcus Thorne, and his state license number. The plumbing permit told the same story. He was not just the owner, he was the legally registered craftsman responsible for the safety and integrity of the home's core systems. He placed the documents into a $12 accordion file he bought at Office Max. They felt heavy and substantial in his hands, a physical counterweight to the digital treachery. 2 days later, having heard nothing, he sent a text message to Tasha. He kept it simple, playing the part of the heartbroken husband. "Can we please talk about this? I don't understand what's happening. I love you." He added the last 3 words deliberately. He knew they were a lie, the love having curdled into something cold and hard in his chest, but he needed to appear to be the one trying to reconcile. He needed to be the victim. Her reply came 4 hours later, a single, brutal text. "Mom says it's better if we let the lawyers handle it. Don't contact me again." He took a screenshot of the message. He saved it to the Glenville evidence folder. That was it. The door was closed, locked, and now legally barricaded. Her reference to lawyers was the invitation he needed. They wanted to play by the rules? Fine. He knew a few rules they had apparently forgotten. For the next week and a half, he went dark. He went to work, took on extra shifts, wiring a new Panera Bread out in Independence. The complex, logical work was a balm to his mind. He was quiet, focused. His co-workers noticed his intensity but said nothing. He spoke to no one about his situation. He lived at the Crestwood Inn, eating cheap takeout, and in the evenings, he organized his folder of evidence and planned his next move, feeling the anger inside him cool and harden from a raging fire into a focused, high-energy beam. The search for a lawyer was Marcus's next logical step. He didn't want a bulldog, a screamer, who would rack up billable hours on pointless, aggressive letters. He needed a technician, someone who understood that the most effective victories are often the quietest. He spent an evening at the motel, using its spotty Wi-Fi to search for attorneys specializing in real estate and contract law in Cleveland. He bypassed the flashy websites with pictures of lawyers standing in front of courthouse columns. He was looking for something more subdued. He found her on the 3rd page of his search results. Anita Hayes, attorney at law. Her website was simple, almost stark. No stock photos, no grand promises, just a list of her practice areas and a brief professional biography. She'd been a prosecutor before going into private practice. That appealed to Marcus. Prosecutors built cases. They followed the evidence. Her office was in a modest brick building in Ohio City, a world away from the glass towers downtown. Her hourly rate was listed at $350, a significant sum for him, but he knew this was an investment he had to make. He called the next morning and scheduled a consultation. When he walked into her office 2 days later, he felt a sense of calm. The space was neat, organized, and unpretentious. Anita Hayes was a black woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and her natural hair styled in elegant, tightly coiled twists. She wore a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress that probably cost more than his entire suit. But it projected competence, not flash. She shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Thorne, please have a seat. My assistant said you have a property issue." Marcus didn't waste time with emotional preamble. He opened the $12 accordion file he had brought and began laying documents on her polished mahogany desk. 2 weeks ago, my wife and my mother-in-law locked me out of the home I own. He laid down the certified copy of the deed. The property is solely in my name. He laid down the mortgage agreement. The $94,000 loan is solely in my name. He laid down the screenshots from his phone. They have seized control of the home's smart systems and locked me out digitally and physically. Finally, he laid down the stack of permits. And I am the sole licensed permittee for all the electrical and plumbing work done on the premises. I did the work myself. Anita Hayes listened without interrupting, her eyes moving from document to document. She picked up the electrical permit, her brow furrowing slightly as she read his name. She then looked at the screenshot showing Queen Bee as the master administrator. A slow, thin smile spread across her face. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted a fatal weakness in its prey. "They have made a critical mistake, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet and measured. "A very, very critical mistake." She leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, which probably cost $1,500. "Legally, this is straightforward. Since you are the sole name on the deed and the loan, your wife is, in the eyes of the law, a tenant with no lease. We can begin eviction proceedings immediately. It's a process. It takes time, but it's decisive." She paused, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the stack of permits. "But this," she said, "this is where they stopped being merely cruel and started being foolish. The permits add a layer of liability they clearly don't comprehend." She leaned forward again. "But we can be even more elegant than that. Forget the eviction for a moment. Let's talk about utilities. The electricity, the gas, the water. Whose name are the accounts in?" "Mine," Marcus said immediately. "All of them. I've had the accounts with Cleveland Public Power and Dominion Energy for over a decade. When I bought the duplex, I just had the service address transferred." Anita's smile widened. "Is she an authorized user on any of those accounts?" "No," Marcus said. "It never came up." "Perfect," she breathed. "They have locked you out of a house you are paying for, a house for which you are legally responsible for the core systems, and they are living there using utilities that are billed to you. This is not just a domestic dispute. This is a house of cards." She explained the next phase with chilling, technical precision. "Your wife, or more likely her mother, is not stupid. They know they can't live there forever with the bills in your name. To establish any kind of residency claim for their legal battle, they will have to attempt to transfer the utility services into Tasha's name. They see it as a simple administrative step. When they do that," she continued, her voice dropping, "the utility company's internal system will automatically flag a mismatch. The account holder's name is Marcus Thorne. The person requesting the transfer is Tasha Williams. She is not on the account. She has no authority. For the company's own liability protection, especially concerning a property, with recent extensive electrical work registered to a specific licensee, their standard operating procedure is not to ask questions. It is to suspend service pending verification from the registered account holder." Marcus felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. He saw the entire circuit diagram in his head, the inevitable, logical conclusion. "So what do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anita Hayes leaned back, the picture of calm confidence. "You do absolutely nothing, Mr. Thorne. You don't answer their calls. You don't reply to their texts. When the utility company contacts you for authorization, and they will, you ignore them. You let the system do its job. This isn't revenge, it's procedure. They built this trap themselves. We're just going to let them walk into it." He left her office an hour later after paying her a $2,500 retainer from his savings. It was a huge amount of money for him, but as he walked out into the bright afternoon sun, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The anger and hurt were still there, but now they were channeled, focused. He was no longer a victim. He was a strategist. He just had to wait for his opponent to make her next predictable move. The wait was the hardest part. For 12 long days, Marcus lived in a state of suspended animation. He worked, he ate, he slept. He drove his dusty Camry from the Crestwood Inn to various job sites across the city, his hands steady as he wired junction boxes and installed light fixtures. He was a ghost in his own life, moving through the motions while his mind was fixed on a single, anticipated event. He reread his copy of the National Electrical Code book in the evenings, not because he needed to, but because its rigid logic and absolute rules were comforting. He resisted the urge to drive by the duplex. He didn't check Tasha's social media. He needed to be completely disconnected, a non-entity, so that when the time came, his inaction would be total. The only communication he had was a single curt email from Stephen Finch, Tasha's lawyer, stating that he was to direct all communication through his office. Marcus forwarded it to Anita Hayes with a one-word message, FYI. Her reply was instantaneous. Good. They are proceeding as expected. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks and 2 days after he'd been locked out, it happened. He was 60 feet up in a scissor lift, installing conduit in the ceiling of a new warehouse in Euclid. The air was cold, and his breath plumed in front of him. His phone, tucked into the chest pocket of his jacket, buzzed. He lowered the lift, his heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. He pulled off his work gloves and took out the phone. It was an email. The sender was no reply at cpp.org, Cleveland Public Power. The subject line was stark. Action required. Service transfer request for account number 774-09B. He tapped it open, his thumb steady. The email was brief and bureaucratic. Dear Marcus Thorne, this email is to inform you that a request has been received to transfer ownership of the utility service at 1457 East 120th Street into the name of Tasha Williams. As the current account holder of record, your authorization is required to complete this transfer. To prevent any interruption of service during this transition, please click the link below to authorize this change. If you did not request this change or do not wish to authorize it, please contact our customer service department at your earliest convenience. Please note that if no action is taken by 5 p.m. today, standard security protocols will be initiated to protect your account, which may include a temporary suspension of service at the address in question pending verification. He read the email 3 times. He noted the language, to prevent any interruption of service. They were framing his cooperation as the default, the path of least resistance. He saw the deadline. 5 p.m. It was currently 2:17 p.m. He could feel the eyes of his foreman on him from the ground below. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. Then he performed the most difficult, most powerful action of his life. He did nothing. He didn't click the link. He didn't call the number. He simply closed the email, slid the phone back into his pocket, zipped it up, and put his gloves back on. He raised the scissor lift back to the ceiling and picked up his conduit bender. He focused on the task in front of him, on the precise angle of the bend he needed to make. The work was clean, logical, and honest. It was everything his marriage had not been. As the afternoon wore on, a quiet, grim satisfaction settled over him. This wasn't a passionate act of revenge. He wasn't screaming or breaking things. He was simply letting a system, a fair and impartial system of rules, run its course. They had used a system, the Smart Home app, to lock him out. Now, a much larger, more powerful system was about to respond. It was a technical inevitability. At 4:59 p.m., he was packing up his tools for the day. He imagined the moment. Somewhere in a drab office building downtown, a piece of automated code would execute. A signal would be sent. A digital switch would be thrown at a substation. And at 1457 East 120th Street, the house he had filled with light and power would be plunged into darkness. The heart he had installed would stop beating. The initial reaction from the other side came faster than he anticipated. At 6:30 p.m., as he was eating a bland turkey sandwich in his motel room, his phone rang. It was Tasha. He looked at the screen, at her picture, and silenced the call. A moment later, a voicemail notification popped up. He listened, his face impassive. "Marcus, What the hell? Her voice was sharp, annoyed. The power is out. Did you forget to pay the bill or something? This is not funny. Call me back. He deleted the message. An hour later, at 7:15 p.m., another call. Another voicemail. Okay, I called the power company. Her voice was higher now, laced with panic and anger. They said the account was suspended. They said you have to call to authorize it. What is this, some kind of game? You are being so childish, Marcus. This is our home. Fix this, now. He noted the our home. It was only our home when she needed something from him. He deleted the message. The next call, at 8 p.m., was from Brenda. Her voice was the one he was waiting for. It was low and dangerous, the voice of a woman whose authority had been challenged for the first time in decades. Marcus, this is Brenda. The lack of any pleasantry was telling. I don't know what pathetic little stunt you're trying to pull, but it stops now. You are embarrassing, Tasha. You are embarrassing me. You think this makes you a big man? Playing with the light switch like a toddler? Turn the power back on. You will not win this. He saved that message. It was a keeper. The strike was not a single, explosive event. It was a cascade, a chain reaction of consequences that would unfold in the quiet, impartial darkness. The smart home panel was now a dead plastic screen on the wall. The $2,200 stainless steel refrigerator he had so carefully leveled was now just an insulated box where hundreds of dollars of gourmet food were beginning to spoil. The Wi-Fi router was dark, cutting off their access to the outside world, to their social media, to their illusion of control. The electric water heater would no longer heat water. The house, which they had tried to steal, was reverting to its original state, a cold, dark, empty shell. And he knew that the smart locks, their primary means of keeping him out, had a battery life of about 3 days before they, too, would die, leaving only the manual keyhole. A keyhole for which he, and only he, had the key. The system was working perfectly. The collapse came in waves, a series of increasingly desperate communications that painted a vivid picture of the chaos unfolding inside the dark duplex. Marcus didn't have to imagine it. They narrated it for him, one frantic voicemail at a time. He sat in his sterile motel room, listening to the consequences of their actions echo back at him through his phone's small speaker. The 9:45 p.m. call was Tasha again, but her tone had shifted dramatically from anger to pleading. She was crying. Marcus, please! The tears were audible in her choked sobs. It's so cold in here. My phone is on 2%. All the food we bought for the party this weekend. It's all going to be ruined. The freezer is full of stuff from Heinen's. That was hundreds of dollars. Why are you doing this to me? To us? I don't understand. He understood perfectly. He understood that the me and the us were entirely dependent on his utility. The man, the husband, the partner. He had been disposable. But the man who paid the bills and kept the lights on? He was suddenly essential. He deleted the message, feeling not a shred of pity, only a cold, hard affirmation of the truth he had been avoiding for years. The final call of the night came just after 11 p.m. It was Brenda, and the mask of her smug superiority had been ripped away, revealing the sputtering rage beneath. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice venomous. I have lawyers who will bury you. You will not see a single dime from this property. We will take it all. We will ruin you. You think you're so smart, don't you? I told Tasha. I told her, he'll crawl back. They always do. I guess I was wrong. You're not just weak. You're cruel. You're a cruel, pathetic man. Marcus saved that voicemail. He played it back twice. He'll crawl back. They always do. It was the thesis statement of their entire worldview, that he was lesser, that he needed them more than they needed him, that his pride was a flimsy thing that would crumble under the slightest pressure. Hearing her spit her own failed prophecy back at him was more satisfying than any shouting match could ever be. The next morning, the consequences began to compound. Anita Hayes had arranged for a process server to deliver the official eviction papers. The server, a burly ex-cop named Frank, called Marcus afterward to confirm delivery. "Served her at 9:32 a.m., Frank said, a note of amusement in his voice. Place was dark as a tomb. The lady who answered the door, the older one, looked like she hadn't slept in a week. The younger one was sitting in a car in the driveway. Looked like she was charging her phone. Handed the papers right to the wife. She didn't say a word, just looked at me like I'd landed from Mars." The public humiliation, Marcus knew, would be the sharpest blow for Tasha. She lived her life through a filter of curated perfection on social media. Her image was everything. The inability to post, to project success, would be a unique form of torture. He could picture her friends texting, "Where are you? Why are you so quiet?" and her having no socially acceptable answer. The financial cascade was just as severe. The $600 worth of artisanal cheeses, organic meats, and expensive champagne they had bought for their party was now a rotting, stinking mess in the silent, high-end refrigerator. Brenda, a woman accustomed to the effortless comfort of her Shaker Heights mansion, was now living in a cold, dark house with no hot water. The electric water heater was as useless as the Wi-Fi. He imagined her fury at having to take a cold shower, or worse, having to drive back to her own home. A 30-minute admission of defeat just to wash her hair. They were trapped. They couldn't stay in the cold, dark house, but leaving it felt like surrendering the territory they had fought to claim. Brenda would have to start paying for hotels, for endless takeout meals. Her plan to seamlessly transfer her daughter from Marcus's care to a new, upgraded life had hit a fatal snag. She was now forced to finance her own daughter's folly, her own money draining away to cover the costs of their failed coup. By the third day, the smart lock's battery would be dead. Marcus knew its specifications. Without power from the main line, and with the internal battery drained by its constant failed attempts to connect to the dead Wi-Fi, it would become just a piece of metal. The only way in would be the manual key, and the only person who had that key was him. On day 4, Anita called him. "They're panicking," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Finch, their lawyer, has called me 3 times this morning. First, he threatened emergency court orders. I reminded him that you are the legal owner and debtor of the property, and that you are under no obligation to provide free utilities to an unauthorized tenant, even if that tenant is your spouse. Then he tried to negotiate, offering to have Tasha pay the bill if you would just authorize the transfer. I told him that was not an option at this time." "What was the third call?" Marcus asked. "He was pleading," Anita said, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. "He wanted to arrange for you to pick up your things. He said his clients were prepared to vacate the property in exchange for you restoring the power." The reversal was total. The women who had told him they would be in touch about your things were now begging to be let out of the prison they had created for themselves. "Tell him I'll consider it," Marcus said, his voice calm. "But I'll need to inspect the property for damages first. I'll be there Saturday at 10 a.m. They are to be completely moved out by then. I will have a police escort to ensure a peaceful transfer." He was no longer the man locked out in the rain. He was the man with the keys, the man who controlled the power, the man who was dictating the terms. The system had worked. A year and a half later, sunlight poured through the large bay window of the downstairs unit at 1457 East 120th Street, illuminating the rich grain of the newly refinished hardwood floors. The air no longer smelled of sawdust and primer, but of lemon polish and the faint, comforting scent of brewing coffee. The duplex was transformed. It was no longer a construction site. It was a home. His home. Marcus sat at a sturdy oak dining table he'd bought for $300 from a local craftsman, a cup of black coffee steaming in his hands. The legal battle had ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Faced with a mountain of evidence and a house they couldn't live in, Tasha and Brenda had capitulated completely. The divorce was swift. Tasha, saddled with her own credit card debt and a lawyer's bill that Brenda had eventually refused to keep paying, walked away with nothing but her clothes and a bruised ego. The house, the loan, the equity, it was all his. The law had simply affirmed the reality of the work he had done. He had spent the first few months after they left reclaiming the space. He had to throw out the $2,200 refrigerator. The smell of rot had seeped into the insulation itself. It was a sunk cost, a monument to their destructive vanity. He replaced it with a modest, reliable $900 Amana model. He painted the walls a warm, calming gray. He finished the trim, installed the light fixtures, and brought the space to the state of completion he had always envisioned. The upstairs unit, with its 2 bedrooms and brand new kitchen, was now rented out to a young family, a nurse, her husband, who worked for the city, and their little girl. They paid $1,200 a month in rent, a sum that covered the entire $780 mortgage payment, the property taxes, the insurance, and still left him with a few $100s of positive cash flow each month. The duplex was no longer a financial burden. It was a successful business, an engine of his financial independence. His life had found a new, quieter rhythm. He was still a licensed electrician, still making his $61,000 a year, but his relationship with his work had changed. It was no longer just a job. It was a calling. On Saturdays, his living room transformed into a classroom. Today, 2 apprentices, teenagers from the neighborhood named Jamal and Kevin, were sitting on the floor, intently studying a wiring diagram. "Okay," Marcus said, pointing to the diagram. "So the power comes from the panel through the 14-2 wire to the first switch. But we want the second switch to control the light too. So how do we do that? What kind of wire do we need to run between the 2 switches?" Jamal, a lanky 17-year-old with bright, curious eyes, chewed on his lip. "A 14-3 because you need the extra wire, the traveler, to carry the signal between them." "Exactly," Marcus said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. His neat locks, now flecked with a few distinguished strands of gray, framed a face that was more peaceful than it had been in years. "That's exactly right. The traveler wire is the key. It's the unseen connection that makes the whole system work." He had started the informal apprenticeship program 6 months ago. He saw kids in the neighborhood with nothing to do, full of potential but lacking direction. He saw himself in them. He wanted to give them what he had, a skill, a tangible, valuable trade that no one could ever take away from them. He taught them code. He taught them safety. He taught them how to read a blueprint. He was building something more important than a house now. He was helping to build lives. He rarely thought of Tasha or Brenda anymore. He had heard through the grapevine that Tasha had moved back into her mother's house in Shaker Heights, their relationship reportedly strained by the financial and social fallout of their failed scheme. He felt no anger toward them, no desire for further retribution. He only felt a kind of distant pity. They had been so obsessed with the appearance of wealth, the expensive brands, the fancy parties, the glamorous finishes, that they had completely missed the source of true value. True wealth, he now understood, wasn't in a $2,400 dress or a marble backsplash. It wasn't in a zip code or the car you drove. True wealth was in the skill of your own 2 hands. It was in the knowledge inside your head. It was in the integrity of your work. It was in building something that lasts, something that serves others, something that provides safety and comfort and light. They had tried to take his house, but they could never take his trade. They could cut the power, but they couldn't take away his ability to restore it. He looked at Jamal and Kevin, their heads bent over the diagram, their minds working to solve the puzzle of the three-way switch. He was passing that power on to them. This was his real legacy. Not a building of wood and wire, but a foundation of knowledge and purpose in the next generation. The lights in his house were on, bright and steady, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that they would never go out again. As you navigate your own challenges, remember where true value lies. It's not always in what you own, but in what you can build, what you know, and the character you forge along the way. If you've ever felt underestimated, let us know in the comments how you found your own strength. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice and empowerment.